Right. Well, this is Ginny Dodunski, the Wormwise Programme Manager for Beef and Lamb New Zealand. Uh, Thanks for coming on, Ginny.
Thanks for having me. Always enjoy having these conversations.
Oh, cool. Now, as you know, you've been involved with DAGI a bit in kind of the setup and model and feedback, and it's been very helpful. So just keen to run through a few things today. First of all, what is the state of the nation with drench resistance in New Zealand at the moment?
Yeah, cool. I've just literally been writing a paper for the Vets Conference this year, which is about parasite management on some good cattle systems that I've come to know. And my initial introduction on that is you'd have to be living under a rock in the sheep industry in New Zealand not to either have been directly affected by drench resistance yourself or at least certainly know somebody else who has, or certainly heard a lot of talk about it. So the data for sheep out there now says that it doesn't matter which data set you look at, it's somewhere around the mid 30% of farms when you look have triple drench resistance, and nearly every farm in New Zealand has some sort of drench resistance. There are a handful around, though. We'll acknowledge that there's still a handful around that have very, very minimal levels of resistance to a couple of the old chemicals, which in effect is almost no resistance, but they are probably very much the minority now.
Cool. So, sobering news, 1 in 3. Not where we wanted to be, but kind of where we thought we probably would get if we continued to farm like we were.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the thing that none of us expected was how quickly, Ryan, it was going to happen, because it all sort of happened in a wave over about 2 or 3 years, and we all went, oh. When you've been talking about something for 20 years as being a threat, you kind of expect it to creep up on you, but it really didn't seem to do that. And I think that really hammers home the point to farmers that if you think you're going to see this with your eyes before you get hit with a disaster, you won't. And I was just reading an old article from Gordon Levitt, who's a long time breeder of worm-resistant sheep up in Northland, and he made the point that when your drenches are failing, is even if you take out 30% or 50% of the worms, it still gives the lamb enough of a break for its immune system to kind of deal with the rest, and you won't necessarily see that they aren't growing well or aren't performing well. They certainly won't be growing well, but you won't see it as necessarily dagginess or clinical disease until the drenches are failing quite badly.
Yes, and that's what we're seeing clinically with our clients as well, that when it does fall over, it's dramatic.
Oh, spectacular. And at that point, the drenches are 0% effective or 10% effective. We're not talking a diagnosis of theoretical resistance where they're 80%. It's a crash.
It's scary. But this is all doom and gloom.
Let's
stop that, because the cool thing is, and Wormwise, with your fantastic work, has been pushing the message of what can we do about it. And I was talking with some of my colleagues, and we've all got some cool stories from around the country where farms have taken these principles, put them in place, and they're sitting in a really good position now. And some of them have come from drench resistance to drenches working again. What are you seeing out there?
Oh, totally seeing the same thing. And it's really neat in my position. I get to read a lot of reports, and for instance, Beef and Lamb have funded these livestock parasite management groups around the country, which are basically little discussion groups talking about all this stuff and going around each other's farms and suggesting system change. And I've literally just been spending some time this morning reading some of those, and like the things that people are doing and the changes that they're seeing and the improved animal production that they're getting out of it from changing management so that their young stock aren't exposed to so many parasite larvae. It's really heartening. It's really neat. And I think farmers are really learning from each other in this space, even if it's not in formal groups like that. They're definitely talking to each other. Everyone in the industry needs to get on board with this, because the farmers will actually leave us behind if we don't keep up with what they're doing.
Yeah, and I really like that point in terms of this isn't just about farming or making changes to stop drench resistance. It's actually increasing the profitability of their systems, isn't it? Because
It's super cool. Yeah.
if you avoid larvae, they grow faster. You get them off quicker. You get better prices. So it's a real
100%.
economical system, not just a punishing system, isn't it? So it's really good.
Yeah, it's neat. And, I always go on about this with the ewes, but, we've been selecting for these more and more productive ewes through our ram breeders who have been, pushing performance for 20 or 30 years and, feeding those ewes better. If we start doing it because of drench resistance, well, that's just fantastic because they needed it anyway.
Now, what I'd really like to drill down in, so, there's a whole suite of resources on the Wormwise website around what we can do. Two of the key ones that really impact on where DAGI is trying to hit is around larval avoidance and refugia. Now, those can be tricky things to explain, and I'm sure you've had a lot more experience than I have. What's your take on, shall we start with larval avoidance and why that's important?
Let's start with probably the most important one first, which is the larval avoidance, because we know that, young stock and our older stock, it still affects them, but very much more the young stock, at a daily intake of high levels of worm larvae and then the developing stages within the animal until something changes. Those the things that they do to the animal in terms of its behaviour. They spend less time grazing, they spend less time cutting, their appetite is reduced, they spend more time just mooching around and not eating and growing. And that all happens in the animal before we see anything like DAGs, weight loss or non-growth. So there's all that stuff that's going on that parasites are causing that, with our management, we can take away some of that challenge and get better performance. So the larval avoidance, I just think that's the big opportunity. And when we look at how we can set our farm systems up differently so that our young stock are grazing, eating less worms every day, easiest way to put it, then we're on a winner.
Yeah, because I guess we probably as an industry have kind of got it back to front a little bit, haven't we? Because we do fecal air counts, which measure adult worms essentially in the animal, and that's all we can visually see. We often put our whole priority on that, but that's often telling us what's happened 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's if there's such a lag, and fecal air counting and drenching based on fecal air counting definitely got a bad name, 15 or 20 years ago, because people waited too long for air counts to rise to some predetermined level, which may not have been appropriate for their farm, and then ended up with, production problems. So I think every farmer, when they start doing that sort of monitoring, they get their eye in for what it means on their farm, but often it's as you start to see them go up, because the more feedback I get from people doing this stuff, they'll run along at a low level when animals are on low contaminated feed for quite a lot longer than what you would expect for your normal drench interval. But then it's when they start going up that you sort of it's time to move. And if they're shooting up at 28 days, then that's actually a red flag. Like, you've got a problem there. Those young animals need to be grazing somewhere else if they're getting heavily reinfected so that the air counts are high, right on that month, then that's not a good place for them to be grazing anyway.
Yep. So with that larval avoidance picture, I guess what we're trying to achieve with DAGI is bring that invisibility to light. So kind of represent, where are your high risk paddocks, or what's your most contaminated down to your least contaminated.
You've got a larval wedge instead of
a larval
wedge.
wedge. Yes, yeah, that'll be great. What are some people doing at the moment to create that awareness, or how are they avoiding those larvae? I mean, crops must be one of them.
Yeah, crops is always the one that springs to mind, isn't it? Because it's such a physical process of going through, taking out the grass and putting in this other thing that isn't grass, because anything that isn't grass nearly always has less larvae on it. And so that's obviously, an obvious one that doesn't fit in every farm system and not under everybody's management, because successful cropping is a very much attention to detail process. And, in some of the areas I work in where, you are the last farm on a long road away from contractors, and all of the timing, unless you've got your own gear, can be really problematic to grow good crops. So crops are one thing, but then there's the other opportunities around grazing rotations and creating grazing blocks on the farm where non-susceptible stock classes prepare feed or clean up feed where the young animals have been. And that there's big opportunity there, and we see some neat examples of farms where people think, this is too hard, I can't do any of this. But when you start thinking about how you could reorganise rotations, or maybe we can get animals across that road, or maybe there is maybe there are times where we could take animals across that creek and then have whatever. It's just sort of getting out of your set paradigm of why we do things where we do them, and there's usually really good logical reasons why people have their farms set up that way. But when you layer the parasite stuff over it, it's changed some of that.
Stops working. Yeah. And so those are those little things like don't follow lambs with lambs, like use ewes to prep lamb paddocks, cattle in between, all those kind of things.
All of those sorts of things. And also, life's not perfect. So when you've got to break those rules, then think about what are the mitigations that are going to put in place to make sure that we don't just keep ramping up the contamination in that area, because you can't always do everything perfectly.
Yeah. Right. So larval avoidance is cool. I think it's often, not as well understood as it could be. That is the critical bit that is driving a lot of the production issues.
Yeah, and I guess before you move on from larval avoidance, the one thing is that lambs and calves should never, ever, ever be used in any sort of pasture control role. So they are just take whatever it is, whether it's a chicory crop or whatever, maybe a pasture or something like that might be different, but, any sort of forage where you're going around on a rotation, they should just be taking out the top. And then, something else comes around and cleans up quality when and where that is required. But as soon as we are rotating young animals around and around and around in an area and they are doing the quality control, they are also taking in a lot more worms, and we've got to stop that.
Good, very good, cool. I mean, it's a double whammy, isn't it? Better nutrition and less larval contamination. So I often think larval avoidance is the easy one to explain. Then we move on to refugia, which I'm going to let you explain it before I try and even have a bash at it. I was at a Wormwise workshop. I was hoping you were going to explain. I was at a Wormwise workshop the other day, and there was a guy in there who did one of the exercises in it, and he said he was a rural professional and he'd worked in the industry for 15 years, and he said it was the first time he'd ever understood refugia. So the Wormwise program is working. How would you explain it, Ginny?
And I often wonder how many people, when we're talking about refugia, are just nodding along and you're thinking, I don't actually know what you're talking about. So it's a confusing word, and I sometimes call it confusia for that reason. But it's basically making sure that we don't let the worms that are surviving our drenches, given that most farms have got drench-resistant worms on them, it's making sure that the worms that survive our drenches don't become the predominant worms on the farm. So it's making sure we dilute out the bad worms with good worms, and what that does mean is that some way, somehow, we've got to leave animals untreated in the system so that the drench surviving worms get to breed with worms that are not drench resistant, and we slow down that whole process of breeding up more and more resistant worms. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think going back to your earlier talk when you were saying, our ram breeders have been doing this great work, giving us great ewes. It's almost the same concept, isn't it? We kind of forget
survival of the fittest.
Yeah, survival of the fittest, that actually worms are mating with each other. And if we can saturate that population of potential mating partners with non-drench exposed worms, then we're onto a winner. We're not we're less likely to produce drench resistant worms. So yeah, so part of what we're trying to achieve with DAGI is kind of visualize that again. So we know that having drenched and then putting out eggs is a risk factor for, or either definitely having resistant worms or potential increased, however that mating works. And so if we can put a picture where we say, right, 80% of the larvae on this paddock are non-drench exposed versus 20% which are, that becomes a good paddock to use as a refugia. And then the opposite, so if we've got 90% are red drench exposed, probably terrible eggs that we do not want in your system, you could run a mob of undrenched ewes over it.
Yeah, and I mean, an example of that might be a new grass paddock that, for whatever reason, you've mostly grazed with lambs for the last wee while, and those lambs have been under some sort of drench treatment. Logically, there probably weren't that many larvae on the new grass because it's gone through a renovation process, and so we've got mostly drench-resistant larvae out there, albeit at low levels, but we don't want to keep building that up. So yeah, like you say, then you bring some undrenched two-tooths or some undrenched ewes through, and their good worms contribute to the population on that area, and we even it up. It's always about evening up, isn't it, in a way? If you're thinking about it at the paddock level, you're trying to even up the playing field.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the critical thing that some people don't understand is we often think of refugia as an animal level
That's
thing,
right.
but it's really not. It's
about what you actually end up putting
thing.
onto the pasture that the next animal then consumes, and it is a little bit hard to get your head around. But understanding that life cycle really helps. So going to Wormwise workshops is a good way of getting your head around that.
Yeah, and I think it was when I went to the other day, it was really good in terms of you start to think more holistically about it because it's and I think going back to, fecal egg count's been great. They've been a really good tool, but they've got us conditioned to the fact that worms are an animal problem, but they're a they're a farm system problem and a contamination of paddock problem. And what's contaminated? That's a real critical.
And I would have lost count, Brian, of the number of times people have asked me in Wormwise workshops, why can't we have something that shows us how many larvae there are on a paddock?
Yes, and why? I guess that is it's a good point to bring up because people keep asking for this tool. Why is it not achievable? Is the big question.
Yeah, and why can't we? Because we can do facial eczema score counts. Yes. Why can't we do? And then you have to explain why. Yeah, well, yes, you can because it's done in research, but it's so highly variable that we couldn't sell you a test because it would be wrong.
Yeah. So on to DAGI. So this drench and grazing integration tool, what we're hoping to achieve is that by giving a visualization of where that larval avoidance is, and then what the mix of resistance risk of those paddocks are, you can make better decisions. So how do you see it fitting in the industry or as a tool from your understanding?
I think it's going to be a neat way of keeping track of things because I do understand and I see how easy it is to forget what's been in what paddock. I think with the advent of more electronic map-based tools, like some of the farm management systems that we've got now, that is much easier. But how are we then using that history to plan our grazing going forward? I'm not sure that there's any great system for that at the moment, and I can see DAGI in conjunction with that history, which is obviously in your program, that's going to be really useful for people because it stops you having to keep stuff in your head, and it allows you to share with your team and just have everything out there in front of you on your phone. And I guess just having a tool like that was just going to make you think harder about all that stuff anyway. Yes. It's often the way, isn't it? Once you start using something like that, it just it makes you more particular about what you're actually doing.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I've as you know, I've been involved on the dark side of the dairy world quite a lot with technology.
Yeah,
And
it's really
one of
cool.
the cool parts of that is cutting down the feedback loop. So,
Yes.
you know, because we can maybe visualize or understand what's happening and give feedback on a daily basis, you can make better decisions that you would have got there eventually, but
Mm.
it might be that, our lambs, halve their growth rate to 150 grams per day, and so what we did was potentially wrong. So instead of waiting for weights feedback or fecal air count feedback a month later, if we can cut down that feedback loop time,
Yeah,
it seems to make a big difference.
That stuff for sheep and beef, as it becomes more cost effective, is going to be such a game changer, because you talked about weights, but
Yeah,
weighing lambs. Yeah, there's some great operators there that make a lot of use of weight gain data in lambs, but heck, it's not widely used. And the other thing that really interests me is that the remote monitoring for cattle behaviour, cattle grazing, rumination, all that stuff. When I first started thinking about how this might relate to parasites, I thought, oh gosh, everyone's just going to be running around with a drench gun all the time. As soon as something's data tracks downwards, they're going to want to drench it. But actually, I think people understand now that stuff it's like a call to action of management. It's not just you need a dose of some medicine. It's like, okay, well, what's this telling me about my grazing management? What's this telling me about this area of the farm? What can we do different to make sure that we go along on a more even level of intake and growth? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we've certainly seen that evolution in the wearable world and dairy, where at the beginning you get a health alert and you jab them with penicillin, which was the equivalent of drenching. And now it's all about how do we use that data to prevent that animal getting sick in the first place.
Yeah,
so
and
it's really come full circle.
Learning from what we're seeing from these really good operators with young cattle who are doing things very differently with drench inputs, just the taking them out of the big mob, giving them a bit more to eat, and maybe giving them, if it's a calf, putting it back on meal for a while, whatever, like that fixes 90% of stuff, if not more. It's amazing. You don't need to stick a needle in them or stick something down their throat. It's incredible.
Yeah, there's one thing that becomes clear when, because I've got this background model and I've been looking at all these things, and feeding is a hugely critical part of the model.
Yeah, and in the end, is it all just about nutrition? And we're all going to be out of a job soon. Yes. People cotton onto this.
Yeah. No, this has been great, Ginny. Thank you very much for catching up.
I'm sure you're going to cut that last bit.
No. I mean, I agree. Nutrition. That's what we say in the whole world. But yeah, no, this has been great. I think, that I really like that messaging of, yes, we've got a massive issue. Yes, we definitely have to do something about it. But there's some great tools out there now in terms of like strategies and stuff, which are coming from the Wormwise program, and people are actually implementing. These aren't airy fairy,
That's right. It's
impossible
not
achievements.
Yeah, it's not some sort of sort of classroom based thing. It's like there are these farmers out there doing these awesome things, and doing stuff that we didn't think you could get away with, and getting great performance. Like, just go and talk to them.
Yeah. And the cool thing about it is it's not just the odd, I talk to my colleagues, it's throughout the whole of New Zealand, wide range of systems, it is achievable. And, really what we're hoping to achieve with DAGI is just give farmers better data to make those decisions around, especially larval avoidance and refugia. So
well done. You've had a big job on your hands. I've been very impressed.
No, thank you very much for catching up, and we will talk again soon, I'm sure.
Great. That was fun. Thank you.